I missed that.
I have had
several times. Are you coming? Are you coming? And then I saw him on the, and then he didn't come. And then I saw him at.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, it took me a long time to try it, but I was insane on the part.
I, on the other hand.
Well, it's a couple minutes after 10 and we have a lot that we could discuss here. But anyway, so again, like last time, since we don't all know each other real well, I think everyone was here last time except for Rick. But let's go around and at least give first names anyway. And so that we start to get to at least know that much anyway. So, and then we can begin. So I'm Carol. And I guess I'm the one that sets up and whatnot, and gets things going. So anyway, it's wow.
I'm Bob. I just come here and absorb. I'm Steve.
And I'm Debbie. I was here last year, but I could not be here last month.
Oh, that's right.
And I won't be able to be here in November, but I'm here today. Looking forward to the discussion.
I'm Fred, and I'm just trying to. I don't know if any of it's holding yet.
Yeah, I'm Mary Ellen. It's all new to me. I'm Kathy, and I was here last year, and it still feels new to me, but it helps. I read it, and it doesn't make a lot of sense. And then I come and hear you guys talk about it, and it makes a little more sense.
Second time through it does. Jim, a guest from Central Lutheran, thank you for hospitality.
I'm Paul Spillane. I'm a member here at Prince of Peace.
Kirsten Maybus, I'm a guest also from University Lutheran Church of Hope.
Liz. I'm Lynn, and I just come to, listen and help if I can.
I'm Darsha. I live in South Bend, Indiana, and you usually see me on the screen at least sometimes, right? So good to be with you. And if you need more information about the Evolve Nest, which I keep bringing up, I have these handouts if you need it.
Catherine, I'm from Buffalo.
Minnesota or New York?
I'm Tom and I'm learning.
I'm Marilyn Breckenridge, and at one time I was the interim pastor here, and that's how I got to know Paul.
I'm Gary, and I'm a member here at Prince of Peace.
And Jean, member.
Rick Rothhausen, I'm always a guest wherever I am.
Welcome, we hope, Chris.
Thank you.
Okay, so this this part 2 is called God for Us. So that's what it's all about, is again that how this relationship works and how God works with the world and how we work with one another. So starting with chapter 4, God revealed, I think that's kind of the big setup for this chapter. And like Lynn said last month when she gave us a wonderful presentation, I put this out because it's very handy. We're still talking very much like you said in chapter 4. It's really about that initial aim, what God is wanting for us. And so I thought this might be useful, and you can always put notes on the back if you want to. So, but chapter 4, God revealed. So we'll start with that, and then chapters 5, 6, and 7 are a little bit more specific how it works as well. And we'll get to that. Well, let's just work on chapter 4 for right now and see how our time goes. So when I was looking at this, again, it's the initial aim that keeps coming up. But also she has this this strong theme of the hiddenness. The chapter is called God Revealed, but how is God revealed? And that God is so hidden from us as well. And so maybe we can start talking about that first. And then she also talks a lot about the rise of consciousness and how evolution worked, which is also fascinating. So how to you is God revealed? Or how is God hidden, which, kind of goes back and forth with us, sometimes we think we see God or feel God, but a lot of times it's God's hidden from us. So what do you think about those themes?
I think most people would argue that if you see God revealed, it's unusual. And you're surprised by that. And regardless of what you think that needs to look like or feel like or be like. Which means that, since I find that rather rare, God spends most of God's time being hidden. And that makes things much more difficult in terms of trying to figure out what God is about.
Yeah, and people look to the supernatural, we brought that up last month too, the miracle thing, if you see something, you think of it as a miracle, well, that's because God is there and did it. But God is more than that, or we're misinterpreting that somehow. It's God is not in the supernatural.
Yeah, I had a student one time whose brother was in a car accident, and there were, can't remember, probably at least 3 other people in the car. He survived. The other 3 died. And so she was claiming this was God's work, saving her brother even though the other 3 died. And I said, so God's only at work in what happened to your brother? Yeah. I'm like, yeah, I don't think so. It's like, how you really, God is gonna pick and choose like that and choose to save 1 person and lose 3? I said, I don't like that, God. So that's what makes this really complicated, because that's what people like to do. And I think they miss, 90% of the picture.
Debbie Jorgen's devotion a couple of days ago dealt with that, and my response to that was that I am hopelessly analytical, and I like to think that God works through natural things.
Yeah.
I would agree with you. I don't think God saves 1 person in a car and lets the others go to wherever. And so my wife, on the other hand, totally the other way.
Yes, I'm persuaded God is actually actively working all the time underneath and within. I mean, the old Lutheran in with and under.
Yeah.
I think is a good handle, if that's where you're coming from, that gives you a clue about what God is up to.
And I believe God is with me in my sorrows and in my joys.
Sure.
So I have a question then, would supernatural events even be compatible with process thought? It feels like they wouldn't be.
No.
Is that true? Yeah, okay. Thank
mean,
you, that's all then.
John once made a statement. Can't remember what the question was, but the answer was, that he was a non-supernatural theist. Okay, so, I mean, this is why she's spending so much time about God in the world, and assuming there's some, you see it occasionally, but not very often, and so people do understand that God, I mean, because the next section is presence. So, I mean, but I think, yes, I think, I would say that supernatural, anything is incompatible.
It involves very much the doctrine of God, of course, and assigning responsibility. Even the knowledge of God is limited. So the question that is going to be discussed at the beer camp at Luther Seminary this next week really focuses on the future is open for God, trying to see that as a affirmation, not as much a negation, God is gonna be in that future, but, for example, we wouldn't say that God knows the results of the tests before the tests are taken. That's a natural event. It's the integrity of the scientific process. But God will be in that future. We may not have omnipotence or omniscience, but we've got presence. And that's why this section with the emphasis on the doctrine of God is, I think, really crucial.
I know Suchocki in this chapter writes about general revelation, and she writes about special revelation, which she's going to deal with later, the following chapters. But I don't know if you can call that supernatural, but I think that general revelation takes interpretation of what's going on in the world and how is God involved in it and how is God present in the events of the world and what is God's aim.
Everything is an event,
Yeah,
but that doesn't tell you what it means.
no.
We would be much helped if Marjorie would give us some account. Darsha, we were talking about this really this week, and we've got all these little actual occasions popping up here and there, and we have to connect them. Whitehead is going to talk about a society, and then he's going to talk about a society of societies, and he's looking for a harmony of harmonies. But to get from the small to the Jim Hart here looks to be about 5'10". He was 1 feet, but anyway.
That's a inch off on either end, but that's close enough.
I think we're touching on really crucial issues that are not sufficiently dealt with by Whitehead himself. Whitehead is very good on the tiny, the small, very good on the really big, not so good on the middle. And that's where we live, is in the middle.
I think Marjorie does try to make up for that some with some of the moves she makes. But I think what we end up with is that unity is in the consequent nature of God. That unity that we're seeking between all of the occasions that make us up and make the world up. It's held together by God's embrace of everything.
Yeah, that's a statement of faith, because we certainly don't seem to see it now.
No.
Yeah.
I once, someone once said in a conversation that, God is so much in the ordinary, that we don't even notice God. And she makes the point that there's never a time when God is absent. And so we have nothing to compare it with. I mean, we wouldn't know what the world would be like if God was really absent. And God is so present. It's like the air that we breathe. The only time we ever think about air is if we're, having trouble breathing, but that's a contrast. God is always present. There's no contrast of God being absent. And so we don't see God. God is so much into the world that we don't pay attention to what God is doing consciously most of the time.
So is God only hidden to us most of the time because of our own inadequacies of seeing God? Is that the reason that God is hidden?
I would agree with that.
Our
That we don't
limitations
have
are-
that. And then when she talks about the nature and the evolution of bringing the world from the Big Bang and all the way through evolution, that there's this continuation of growth and complexity, and then eventually consciousness, and we are the ones with the most consciousness in the world right now. And our consciousness can keep growing, evolution is continuing. And as we become more conscious of God and what's going on in the world, and we can see the interconnectedness and whatnot of the world. We're finally starting to understand how interconnected we are. And then we still only know just a little bit, so it's, you know, and that's, you know, we're a relational world. That's how God made us, and, you know, if we can figure that out, we've got a better understanding of God.
She talks in this chapter about three veils. One is general revelation,
Right.
right? The world as it goes on. And one of the things she says about that is it's easier to see God in the cumulative world than it is in the immediate world. And the evolution is one of those things.
Somewhere I heard that we only use what, a very small percentage of the deductive powers of the human brain. People like Einstein probably use 25%. Average bear uses 14 or something like that. Maybe if we ever evolve to where we're using the whole thing, we'll understand God. But I don't even try to understand God. I mean, it's fun to talk about these things, but as far as, you have to go to a fundamentalist if you want to understand God.
Is it possible for God to be so close to, so present to the world, to creation, to us, that we can't see God? That we can't
I
notice
think that's
God?
it.
I mean, maybe we're part of God.
I
You know,
feel-
I'm talking on
I think
pantheistic.
it's the other way around. I think God's
Maybe-
part of us.
I think that's fair to say, yeah. She talks about general revelation, and also God is also hidden. This is on page 39. God is also at the bottom, also hidden in that God's guidance to us is necessarily adapted to our circumstances in terms applicable to our condition. This means that what we call knowledge of God is necessarily reflective of where and when we are. Our own situation is interwoven with our knowledge. So I think about the person who sees their brother's survival as a miracle, but doesn't see God at work in the deaths of the other three. And I think that's a perspectival thing, that the circumstances that we are in now. And so there are those two things, God's omnipresence and our perspectival, necessarily perspectival knowledge. Those two things are veils, she calls them, that hide God from us. And then the third one is sin. Right? And she sees God as working out that problem, that sin leads us not to hear or follow the aim of God, as being worked out in the history of Israel and of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection.
It also brings up supernatural again for me. Depends on what you mean by supernatural.
Yep.
It seems to me, if you think about all the cultures I'm familiar with around the world, they understand that the material world is one aspect, and behind it, more powerful is the spiritual world. And they work at, through shamanic practices to, be the interface between them. And I think what we've done is, because we got so focused on the material, because that's our left brain domination in our culture, we have lost or we haven't developed the capacities to connect to the spiritual world, which is all around us all the time, and that's the hidden part. And we are, we just assume that what we feel and can measure and see and all that is the world, and that God is there, and God is through all this, and all these other cultures know this, right? And we kind of forgot it and we dismiss it. We think, oh, that's childish. So anyway, so I think it matters what you mean by supernatural, and it's everywhere, but we don't pay attention to it because we haven't developed the capacities to.
So you believe in the supernatural?
Well, yeah, but we call it supernatural because we're focused on the material.
We don't experience it directly.
Right.
And you know, the things have shown that we see, and it's a phenomenal number. Like 1/13,000th of the light spectrum.
Oh, us, our vision?
Our vision.
Yes, we can hardly see
We see
the spectrum of possibilities.
a
Yeah.
spectrum of possibilities, and I know people who talk about the kingdom and the afterlife, all those things not being another dimension within the light spectrum, you know, and you know, go directly to Paul's thing of we now see dimly
Yes.
and darkly, and those things exist around us.
And other creatures have a different, they hear and see things that we can't.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, it's so complex. Somehow we get stuck in thinking this is
Yeah.
the only
I
thing.
mean,
that
even
we-
if you're a mechanic, you know, you get these machines that see more light spectrum. As simply as that,
Yeah.
you know, to the more sophisticated.
I do have some issue with the around thing.
Around.
Yes, spiritual is around, spiritual is within.
Oh, sure,
In and
yeah.
through.
Because what you do when you say around, then you've made it supernatural,
Yeah.
something that's not part of it.
Good correction, yes.
Yeah, and Whitehead was definitely not like that.
I found it helpful in Suchocki on page 41, the last large paragraph, longer, where she says, what is actually seen as we observe the world is not the initial aim of God, but what has been done with that aim in the world's own dealings with it. So what we have done with God's initial aim, or, you know, is what we see rather than God's initial aim. So does that make any sense? It did to me when I read it. So.
Yeah, the world's capable of feeding everybody, and men specifically have screwed it up. So now we don't feed everybody. We starve people to death because we hoard and we're greedy, all kinds of things. So
And we use
we
it,
have impacted the earth.
and we use it as a weapon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We use what as a weapon?
Feeding people, you know, I mean, in time of war, or you make boycotts or deny help, or, I mean, look at Palestine, you know, I mean, not allowing them to get the food in. Yeah, they weaponize everything. It's just.
I hate to be against the Jews, but.
I've also thought of supernatural as a definition of just being outside of what happens in the natural world, that sometimes God breaks the laws of the universe in order to do something special for some occasion. And to say I think of that as a wrong understanding, that God is always here and present with us, and that God works through the stuff he's given to the world in order to bring about that aim as well.
Might
So I
be
don't know if
picking
that's-
it, but isn't supernatural really natural? I mean, we talked about that. What we can see is not the whole picture.
Right.
And so
So we would
anything that we don't see, you know, some people will call supernatural, some people will just say, you know, I don't understand.
Yeah.
The danger of the supernatural language is that you put God up here,
Yeah.
out there, over,
Yeah.
but not here.
Right.
Yeah.
And not
Manipulating things.
within what's going on, but someplace external to that.
Yeah.
And that's what
Yeah.
Marjorie or
He
John.
didn't create, what he created wasn't good, so he's out there tinkering with things, but really what he did create is good, we've just screwed it up. And
Could make an argument for that, but I mean, but the other thing is that this creation wasn't a one-time event.
Yeah.
I mean, in this view of the world, at least from my perspective, it seems to me with the creation and salvation are just two sides of the same coin, and it's always going on all the time in every instant. And I think that's part of what's more difficult to get a grasp on.
I'm kind of
Because
looking forward to.
we've grown up
that.
mostly with this intervention business, which this particular view completely denies in terms of it being occasional.
It just struck me that by all of us or the community thinking of the word supernatural divides us. Because then we look on some people and say, oh, they're kind of crazy, you know. Or those who believe it sometimes feel I can't admit it. And so it becomes a division too, that language, supernatural.
We're kind of on the surface of the distinction between causal efficacy and presentational immediacy. Do you remember those phrases from Whitehead? The fundamental structure of reality is causal efficacy. The many become one and are increased by one. That's constantly going on. You can't try, good luck if you try to stop that. It's running. But presentational, that refers to how things are presented to us, how we see things. Our interpretation functions there. So we project out a tiny bit of what is received causally efficaciously. And that's what we see. I can see Gary over there. He's got that new sweatshirt on, looking good. There's so much going on. He didn't have time to eat breakfast, and he's feeling bad about that. I don't know. Causal efficacy and presentational immediacy are miles apart. And we mostly function in terms of what is presented to us immediately. Jim is right here. I can touch him. Did I pass by? Well, I certainly experienced causal efficacy. So one of the many other theologians have struggled with this, but Whitehead has an epistemology, a doctrine of knowledge. He wrote a book on symbolism, its meaning and effect, and the way in which a symbol, what does a cross do? What does a flag do? Where does that connect? It connects, first of all, in causal efficacy. A symbol has that power to do that. So I just thought that we were right on the edge of that distinction between causal efficacy and presentational immediacy. And we can't go from presentational, it's hard for us. In the chapters in part 2, where she is trying to describe on a presentational immediacy level what is going on causally efficaciously. There's a step of faith in making that connection. Symbolism helps us.
Symbolism can also get in our way too, I think. And I think we see a lot of that with the media environment we're in right now. The way the cross and the flag are being held up as twin symbols by some to do things that neither the Constitution nor Jesus would ever have condoned, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it works more than one way. I also think one of the implications of the hiddenness in the world of God's action and aim at all times is to say that we tend to think of faith as cognitive, as a decision, or as an experience of the divine that, speaks to specially chosen people. One of the things I like about Marjorie's stuff on wisdom later is she talks about how the first step to mysticism is the dark night of the soul and the absence of
Yeah.
the experience of the absence of God from the places you expect God to be, right? My cat is probably better at following God's aim than I am.
Cat doesn't have as many options as you do.
Doesn't have as many options, that's true, although he's got a few. He's a predator and prey, so he's got a fairly complicated consciousness, right? But he doesn't have all of the symbols of faith and history and unfaith and all of these other distractions to being himself. Right? And I'm not here trying to say there's no purpose for the church. She goes on and develops an ecclesiology at the end of the book. That's really important. But there is a sense that in this world that we're talking about, the world may be following the initial aims of God to a much greater extent than the people who claim to be faithful. Right?
I think it's a lot harder to see that right now. And the way she talks about nature is easier to see the increased complexity and harmony, but with us and what's happening in the world, and to maintain hope, or which she's very strong on, that there's good reason to be hopeful, given what we, how we're processing the aims. I really struggle with seeing that.
Well, I share MLK's outlook, which says that the arc of history bends toward justice. And I think, that's the kind of trust, it seems to me, that she's suggesting here.
Right, but it just seems like it might, at times we can see that it's bending that way, and it's.
Well, it has been in the
obvious that
past,
it seems
Doesn't feel
now
like it right
kind
now.
of-
Oh,
Yeah.
Sure, not a straight line, bounces around.
I felt like I was missing aspects of that I wanted more information about, like sin. And it seems to me the tone is very individualistic, as if, I decide, I see Paul and I touch Paul, right? But we're all communities, right? Or our microbiomes all over our bodies inside, and we were nurtured or not in the community that fostered our well-being or not. And in her book, Fall to Violence, she says, sin is when you harm the well-being of another. We live in a culture that's harming well-being of babies from the beginning. And so we're all kind of twisted into sin. So part of our lack of perception is that, but it's the culture that forces us to be, imperceptive and harmful, causing the violence towards others. So I don't see how, you talk about the natural occasions, but they're not individualistic. It sounds individualistic to me, but it's all built on by the community. How well that actual occasion becomes, I don't know, I don't remember all the language now, is dependent on how supportive the community is. So I just, it just feels very kind of disparate. There's just too much missing. Right, and the loneliness, even that is a weird thing for Indigenous folks around the world, because they know the whole earth is alive, it's sentient. Trees are talking, the birds, the animals, the waterways. You're never alone, so you never have a feeling of aloneness. So they laugh when they hear oh, that suicide is a common issue, the Paraha lap, what? People commit suicide? Why would you ever do that? You're in a community of love. Loves you, right? So anyway, so I'm missing some of that stuff.
Have you read the whole book?
No.
No, I
just
haven't
read
either,
what
so-
we- Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So maybe it comes later, is that?
Well, I think she does talk about, when we talk about this, okay, so there's the individual choice that each occasion has to make that when it becomes actual. But then it becomes part of everything else, and there's that integration, and people gain from you and you gain from them, and then that becomes paths for the next round of occasions. So she does keep bringing up integration as well.
But the sin is to not provide for the well-being from the beginning. And so when you do that, you've got layers and layers of ill-being.
Yeah,
That's us, this culture.
yeah.
And we can see it in the politicians.
Yeah, it's true. We, especially Americans, we're too individualistic. We've got that as part of our history. We love people to come, we love family to come here, and we praise individualism to way beyond. We made an idol out of individualism, and so that is a problem, and that's part of the big sin.
Less
The whole book, does she deal with that?
Yeah, I think the
We
whole,
might be
yeah,
jumping.
the
in.
reign of God piece
Yeah,
really
yeah.
brings that
We'll hold the phone.
community together.
Coming.
And but I do think there is the problem that she's writing to what is primarily a individualistic Western view of Christianity that she is trying to communicate with. At the same time, she's trying to problematize and change it. And so starting out, you start out where your audience is, right?
Yeah, and loneliness is a common problem in this culture.
But isn't there somewhere in these first chapters of this section? I can't remember for sure, but it seemed to me she at least implied that the sin is more than individualistic, that the sin that we live with is
Yes.
inequalities and the injustices of organizations
Yeah,
and government and.
She and she's more explicit about it in The Fall of Violence, but she does speak to what we call structural sin, which I think is more or less what you're talking about. And the sense that these structures get going and we don't have the option to, step out of them to a certain extent. We can work to change them, but we can't avoid being part of them.
So how does that affect God? then?
So how does that, well, her in The Fall of Violence, her claim is, number one, it's violence that is the original sin, not reaching for knowledge. So that's number one. And number two, that it's original sin that is first of all against the world. It's first of all Cain slaying his brother, right? And it becomes sin against God. So sin is first of all against the world. It becomes sin against God because God, being in everything, has to experience that, right? So God experiences the sin
From us.
That
is sin against our neighbors, is sin against.
This is where the community thing though matters, because I was sinning for the ill-being from my upbringing or my ancestors who pushed me in a direction away from honoring God, right, towards violence. And so they're responsible too. It's not just me. It's a community responsibility. That's kind of the perspective of the whole world. I mean, other cultures, the individualistic West, it's like you were the problem, right?
But because God is in all of it and experiences all of it, I mean, God experiences all of that structural sin that's weighing on you and keeping you where you are. But God also has all of the possibilities available to God. And so God is never without the resources to, we hope, motivate change in people as a result of that. That's the primordial nature of God. It's not actual. Every possibility that's out there has not happened in this world. But God can draw on that and keep offering those aims to the individuals that then can maybe, lift themselves slightly out of that sin and change the way they're doing things.
He's always calling.
Always calling us. But it's the world that is actual, right?
So does God,
Only
I
the
mean, I think I know the answer already, but to my question. So God works with our actions, our decisions, despite the fact that they are often opposed to what God would like. But I guess the question is, then how does God work with those? At least that's my question.
In eternal concrescence of the consequent nature, God is, this is an imperfect analogy, but I am going to use it. Remember old-fashioned stereo tuners where you could, God tunes up what God values and tunes down the evil as much as able.
So
that's where we get that arc then of the arc toward justice.
But going back 40 minutes. Okay, I've got a slight disconnect. And that is how do we define the supernatural? Because if God is in everything, okay.
How do we?
But God is, how do we find, but God is hidden. In most cases. How do we know, how do we have any assurance that what we're being called to is correct?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
You have to discern the spirits, right?
I mean,
It's
because,
pretty
I mean,
difficult.
we start with the supernatural that everything is, or something is miraculous, okay? I don't go there. I think that supernatural is defined differently. It's just an intervention of God, whether it be large or small. But, if everything is processed and everything, how do you ever know that what you're called to? Does that make? And I'm new to this, so have I missed the step? Have I missed the foundational understanding of something? Huh?
I think we're all new in a sense.
I think when she speaks to the mutuality, what's good for me has to be good for my neighbor, for the world. That's how we know, or at least it's part of how we discern that.
But isn't that so complex?
It
Because
is
what's good
complex.
for us
It is.
in North America isn't necessarily good for someone
But
in
then,
North Africa.
then maybe it's not really good for us. If it's not, if the ripples don't go all the way, then
And she addresses that.
Yeah.
I mean, at chapter 7, maybe, I don't know where it is, but that's exactly what she talks about. Is it should be good for everybody. I mean, justice is not just, for people here, it's for people around the world. And so, yeah, it's a huge challenge, but that's what I took away from that part anyway, is that it is.
And that it is complex. I mean, it's so complex, like she says, there has never been a time where we have lived in a just
Right.
world.
Right.
There's always, the next justice for some people is still injustice for others.
Well, see, that's my
Yeah,
my
and
thing.
so, but God, I think God calls us to do what we can, and as I mean, like now, I think of like with climate change and people feel, oh, it's gonna be terrible for our children, our grandchildren, is there gonna be any, how much death is going to be, how much destruction, whatever. But you see these you know, things popping up of goodness and what's going on. And the more that that happens, and the more hope is created. And then there's more stuff going on and people, you know, there's that creativity within the integration of all of what we're doing. This creativity just kind of blossoms and more comes from it. So there's that possibility if we're open to it. She talks about creativity and consciousness increases with all the different contrasts and you know, for possibilities and novelty. So, and right now we got a huge contrast
Right.
between what we got, and what we wish we had. So,
But the wish we have.
but
See,
how
that's
how
my
we get there,
problem.
Yep.
Whose wish? Okay, because I know there are some people who deplore racial cleansing. There are other people in the world who think you have to do it and earnestly believe that. There are some places in the world, okay, that believe everybody is created with part of God's image and is equal. And there are some people in the world, okay, and we're seeing this especially in the Middle East, that truly believe that a woman's role is to be subjected to her husband. And they earnestly believe that.
It's not just
So
in the
who are
Middle
we
East,
to
it's here
say?
too.
Yeah, it's also
You know,
right
You know,
here.
that,
Yeah,
That's right.
Yes.
I think Christianity really screwed up back in Nicaea. They let the man's attorney edit the Bible. And that changed our perspective. That's where that comes from. I mean, back then, men owned their wives and their daughters and crap like that. And they thought that was right. And they put it in the Bible. Unfortunately, I think there's bullshit in the Bible, folks. And that's not a nice thing to say.
I mean, part of it is though, the Bible is simply a document that requires interpretation. And the issue really is,
I know.
how do you interpret that text?
Yeah,
And if you just say, well, it was part of the culture of the time.
Yeah.
But it's not part of the revelation.
yeah, and it's not, and it's not
Separate
true
those
just
things
because
out,
it was.
Which
just
a
because it was
lot of
culture.
people don't bother to do. They
Human
assume it's all
sacrifice
the
was
same.
common then too. Now instead of human sacrifice, we starve people to death by the
Well-
hoarding of resources. Do you remember the lady who ran for president on the Democratic ticket and her whole
Which time?
Which times, yeah.
when the asshole won the first time.
Don't worry.
Her whole platform was, we gotta love everybody. And
You thinking of
Which-
Mary Ann Williamson?
what, yeah.
Oh, Mary Ann
Yeah.
But,
Williamson.
and she had it exactly right, and if we would do that, we would solve the problems, but. I mean, it was so revolutionary in
Right.
our environment that she just got laughed off the
Right.
stage.
Right.
Well, and I will say, as a part of the civil rights movement, there was a time when the civil rights movement was simply saying, you just have to teach everybody to love one another.
Yes,
And there came a point where people finally said, no, damn it, we have to change the laws. Telling people they have to be nice to everybody else and love everybody else isn't gonna cut it. We can tell that.
apparently not. I mean, they sure tried hard enough,
Seems so simple.
So,
but
So Whitehead, and Marjorie doesn't use these in this book to my knowledge. But Whitehead talks about the harmony of harmonies, this consequent nature of God that's aimed at the harmony of harmonies. And that really there are three criteria he gives. My friend Monica Coleman adds justice. But they are adventure, zest, and peace are the three he uses.
And what was the second one?
Zest,
Yes.
what?
Adventure.
adventure, zest, and peace. Adventure is really living into change, right? Risk taking and transcendence of just the way things have always gone in the past. Zest combines its beauty and
intensity.
intensity, right? So you don't want either anesthesia, which has no intensity, or discord, which has no beauty. It's an integration of those things. And peace is something you can't like achieve. It is something that comes upon you from living in, but it is a criteria. If there is peace, then things are going according to the aim. Right? And my friend Monica Coleman adds justice for just the reasons that we've been talking about, that you can't depend on the many layers of our social sinfulness to lead us to love people in the way that everything needs to be loved without some guidance.
This is for harmony.
That's for these are the criteria that say this is, how do you hear the initial aim? Is it leading in that direction? Right? Well, if things are happening that are leading in that direction and you join in with them, then you're probably hearing God's initial aim. I think that poses, for Lutherans, I think that poses a particular problem because we look at Jesus on the cross and we don't see that. Right? How is this leading toward adventure, zest, and peace? And yet we say that's what where God is most visible is in Jesus on the cross.
Rather than resurrection.
The resurrection.
Marjorie goes to resurrection. Yeah.
Well, I thought that's why Lutherans have empty crosses. Catholics have Jesus on the cross because they focus on the crucifixion.
And the suffering.
Less symbols.
Yeah, but I do think a lot of our theology of the cross emphasis in the 20th century and now in the 21st century has focused more on the Jesus who is on the cross than on the resurrected Jesus. But Marjorie's definitely on the resurrected Jesus.
Well, too, part of it, I mean, I think of the crucifixion, that Jesus made that decision. He didn't run away, that if this is what Rome requires,
It wasn't wrong.
Hmm?
It wasn't wrong.
Well-
It was his own folks.
well.
It was wrong.
It was Rome. Rome had the power. I mean, a lot of people bowed to Rome out of fear. The priests and the Jewish
Yes.
authorities. I mean, you can put it to the same point where like what Steve said in his sermon on David. Bathsheba was raped, I mean, you got a power problem here, and Rome was the power, and Rome called for anyone who was, making waves to be crucified, and there were thousands of crucifixions. Jesus was just one of them. And it's the commitment that God is with us through suffering and then there's the resurrection. And she also kept bringing up, well, and at least 2 or 3 times, and in chapter 16, you're gonna see it come together. Again, that there's always injustice in this world. We're never gonna make it to justice, or if we do, if the world lasts that long, and maybe in a couple million years, maybe we'll get to justice for everyone. But finally, in the end, and each of us has an end, then we come into justice. And chapter 16 is so beautiful. I'm so glad we read that first last year, because I keep looking at that saying, wow, that says so much about what's going on here in the world too. That God is the beginning and God is the end, and gives us freedom to at least deal with it somewhat as we can, so.
I'm thinking of the distinction between God and creativity. Creativity is the many become one and are increased by one. And God is foolish enough to will that it be so. In the reversal of the poles, the physical and the spiritual, mental, God takes a risk and makes a choice. God envisions the whole realm of eternal objects, possibilities, ways in which the many can become one, be increased by one. So we're stuck in a world that God wills to be, the many becoming one. God risks creativity. And we have to work at all these levels. We have to work at the primary level. That's where symbolism is so powerful. And we have to work on the prayers of the church. We have to work on the hymns of the church. We have to sing different music. We have to play different bands. We need this conversation to happen because we're scrambling to try to keep up with what's going on. Creativity is running. You can't stop it. God was foolish enough to will that it be so. And we do well to follow that example and take chances, stick our necks out. I think there's going to be an opportunity for that to happen. People are hurting, they're angry, they're troubled. There's a possibility of connecting. We don't maybe have all the tools. We're going to have to be able to pick up and use what we can. But the risk of otherness, that's been a European theme more than an American theme. We've had the frontier and the cheerful optimism of the frontier. But the idea of working with what we have in our hands and being willing to take risks. There'll be mistakes, there'll be honest mistakes, and there'll be willful mistakes.
Can I ask a question that I don't know if it's pertinent or not here, but it's been on my mind for a long time. And that is about the reversal of poles. Is that a one-time occurrence or does it recur?
It's the way God is.
Which means
God is different from us. And then we start by feeling, our occasions start by feeling the physical world around us and then using that to become something new. Whereas God starts with the ranked possibilities that are not actual, but are still possibilities. And constantly concresses everything in all of these occasions in relationship of judgment based on those concrete or those possibilities that are not yet actual. So God's always got God's eye on the future of this vision. That's why it's sometimes called the vision or the envisagement of what could be if everything conformed to the best possibilities.
so God is constant, it's a regular.
It's how God is.
Okay.
It's not, God does not in the consequent nature, God is receiving things moment to moment, everything in the world moment to moment. But in the primordial nature, where God begins, those possibilities are eternal and are eternally ranked for God in terms of You know, this is the vision for the world of perfect justice, zest,
So
beauty,
God
and
needs the
peace.
consequent nature in the world to fulfill what God,
Exactly.
to fulfill God's aim, if I can say it that way.
And
Is that true?
in many senses, to
Linda's
make
making
God,
a face here.
in many senses, to make God actual,
Oh,
right? It's the world that acts. And God aims it.
And God becomes actualized in. But you also need the consequent nature of God because it talks to the primordial nature. So
Mhm.
when the primordial nature provides initial aims, it's actually based on
What's actually
information
happened in the
about
world.
where that actual entity or actual occasion is and what's going on around it and everything.
Now, there are process thinkers, Charles Hartshorne among them, who basically said, no, the reversal of the poles is wrong. So there is process theology that, yeah. Whitehead was wrong.
I do like Charles Hartshorne's, the first book I ever read was Omnipotence and Other Theological Mistakes. It was beautiful.
But Marjorie's what we call a neo-Whiteheadian. She says, no, Whitehead was right. I like these two quotes by Robin Wall Kimmerer from the book Braiding Sweetgrass, which if you want a indigenous people's understanding of the world, and it's I think the best anti-racist book out there, and I also think it's one of the best spiritual books out there.
What was the name of it again?
It's called Braiding.
It's in our library.
Yeah, braiding.
Braiding Sweetgrass.
There are two quotes because they're very close to what we're talking about. Action on behalf of life transforms. Because the relationship between self and the world is reciprocal, it is not a question of first getting enlightened or saved and then acting. As we work to heal the earth heals us. So it all takes place in, Whitehead would call it the world, she's calling it the earth, but right? And the reciprocality as we work to heal others, including the non-human others, the earth itself. We also become healed in that process, right? And then the other one is even a wounded world is feeding us. Even a wounded world holds us, giving us moments of wonder and joy. I choose joy over despair, not because I have my head in the sand, but because joy is what the earth gives me daily, and I must return the gift. And so I think for me, these quotes really speak to that immanence of God in the world and in all of the things in the world. And if you need to see God, start working to heal things.
It was the Jews who actually said, your job is to mend the universe.
Yep.
The what?
Yeah, your task is to mend the universe.
That's an old.
You are not required to complete it,
Yeah,
but you must.
mend it.
I remember when I took a
must
Jewish class at
do your part.
Augsburg 50-some years ago. Rabbi Schwartz, who taught it, talked about the Jewish idea of the universe, or the earth being like a crystal ball that got cracked, and it is our job to be putting it back together again.
Well, there's plenty to do. And,
Yes.
you know, we lost John Cobb just in the last months. And, but the leadership that Cobb gave, Jim was at that conference, is it 10 years ago now?
Not quite, I think. Close though, maybe
Yeah.
8, yeah, something.
Yeah. And there were very specific plans about local buying. You don't transport food across the whole continent to try to feed people. You stress local. There was a vision, and you know, I don't know if we have a process person that has this, the vision that Cobb had, but he had a new economic measure. We wouldn't follow the stock market, which was geared to grow, 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 grow until it collapses on itself. Sustainability was a very high value in that vision. We're still waiting for, we have plenty, there's plenty to do. We have steps to take. But the idea of where is this whole thing going? And he said, Cobb said, Bernie Sanders was my guide. Pretty well follow what's so bad about being a democratic socialist and take advantage of what you have. I think we're waiting to see if the process movement can generate a 45, a 50-year-old, somebody young enough to carry that burden.
The problem, if you're talking within the country, we've abdicated control of the company to the billionaire class. They are, by definition, totally immoral. They want everything for themselves, and they own the government. So we need a new constitution. Puts them out of business.
They're controlling the world too, so it's
What?
not just our country.
No, I agree with that, but we are the most powerful country in the world, and if we'd get our act together, we could probably contribute to the world. Right now, we're tearing it apart more than anybody else. We are the most obscene, immoral country in the world because greed is king.
Well, the Paris Accords would be a good place to start. And Cobb's emphasis was on trying to cooperate with China. The last months of his life, he was in China. He was working on the proposal. Why do we always have to see China as the enemy? Surely the Paris Accords apply equally to the United States and to China.
You know why we have to? Because the billionaires want an enemy, Paul. They need an enemy for their gospel to work.
To a very large extent, China supports the billionaires too.
I think, Darcia, your experience in the nested community, it's a hopeful sign. And how is the reaction? You may remember Darcia has an independent movie, and she had 26 ambassadors, people going door to door. Is the initial response encouraging?
Yeah, so they didn't go door to door, they just, we had a nesting ambassador program over this summer that we were testing, where we talk about and present the 9 components of the evolved nest. If you want, I can just pass this around while I'm talking. And so we taught them the principles, practices of the evolved nest, and then they were to apply it in their walk of life. So we had a bunch of therapists. We invited these people to help us. Therapists, educators, parent activists, and now they're developing, or they have developed, tools that we're now going to put on our new website, Nested World. And then we have a new version of the ambassador program in January, so anybody can join. But it's intended to transform the world from the bottom up, because the billionaires are keeping us, of course, stuck. But we all can, we are all co-constructing one another day to day. And so it's a matter of learning how to, be calm. So the principles of the nest are to understand nature, connection, and partnership, to restorative healing practices, to get back to our way of being in present to one another in a loving manner, right? And we have all these, triggers and stuff that come from our lack of nestedness. And then play is the way to heal. No matter what age you are, it grows your right hemisphere, because we develop that. And play, and then affectionate touch, responsive relationships, multiple nurturers. We all need mentors throughout life, especially babies need multiple caregivers. And then the last two, we put them at the end now: soothing perinatal experience. So when pregnancy, the mom feels supported, birth is soothing, and post-birth they're connected and bonding, and then breastfeeding. So those are the components that we are suggesting. And we have all the evidence now, a lot of evidence from neuroscience, to show how important each one is for building human nature. So we have twisted human nature away from our compassionate orientation and openness, which we see in the nested communities that still exist. So most of them are in Africa, Central Africa. Yeah, anyway, so blah, blah, I get on my soapbox.
I think we're at the intermediate level there.
Yeah,
And you've got 20 people sitting in Prince of Peace Church. They didn't have to come. There's some interest, there's some responsibility to make a difference. And who knows the little rivers of influence that come out of a meeting like this. Some of it is internal, but it doesn't stay internal. We can penetrate the culture. We can elect different people. We can vote for the off years elections. We can be active. So the many become one. Well, we're in an intermediate level. The nested community is one powerful example, due largely to Darsha's own research on the nature of the way in which children are changed by the culture around them. Cobb was very active in the China movement. He was still in his 90s. He was going to China once a year, and he would teach. The potential is there. He was encouraged by the Chinese responsiveness.
I think the movement you're talking about is ecological civilizations. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Is that what the title was?
Yeah. Did I hear you say that many of your lessons are coming from Africa, did you say?
no, the people who are still nested, the San Bushmen in Central Africa, that still practice all the nested aspects, and they're open and flexible and, tuned into natural world, and very agreeable and compassionate, and on and on. So I integrate. The evolvedness is a transdisciplinary insight that integrates anthropology, ethology, neuroscience, developmental science, educational science, and so it shows us how to get back to being an earthling, a regular earthling, instead of, we're kind of floating above the earth and think we don't have to be here and pay attention to nature's laws. We're gonna go to Mars, right? Sorry.
The reason I ask is that's where the population growth is, of course, so maybe that is a sign of hope. Africa,
Not
this would
them,
be,
yeah, they
you
don't
know,
have that many.
there's been dramatic leveling off of population. You've
Yeah.
probably all been following that, and that, I don't know how to interpret that, but that's interesting.
Well, we have
And it's probably a good thing.
a lot of endocrine disruptors, so plastics interfere with our hormones and then make males infertile. And all sorts of things like that happening from our industrial civilization, so.
But a lot of it in this country is choice. People are
Choice,
choosing
right.
to either have.
That's
no
happening
children,
too,
maybe
yeah.
one, yeah.
Well, yeah, in Africa, wealth is still in the family, you know, the more kids you have, the wealthier you are because.
If you're a farmer,
Yeah.
A little louder, please.
not if you're a hunter gatherer, but if you're a farmer, yeah.
Yeah. And you look at Africa now and you look at the United States 150 years ago, and the similarities are pretty dramatic, I think. Just over there going, visiting rural churches, kids under 12 outnumber adults, at least in the churches that we were at, probably 3 to 1.
Say that again.
Children under 12 in the churches outnumber adults 3 to 1, roughly. And that's just a casual observation. It's not a scientific one. But I think probably 75 to 80% of the people in this country would agree with this. But we don't have a democracy, so we can't.
Structures aren't there for it.
What?
The structures.
Yeah, the structure isn't there, and well, in fact, the structure is actively opposing
Yeah.
progress.
Yeah.
And unless, you know, I don't know. In this country, we're screwed unless we get a new constitution. Pure and simple. There've been over 1,000 amendments proposed to our constitution. We've had 27 of them. We don't have the Equal Rights Amendment. You know, you ladies probably know that, but we couldn't get that passed.
Now you're expressing a certain amount of hopelessness.
I
if
am.
may say so.
I am.
And
I am
so
working.
That kind of gets to the last chapter we read. So what about, I mean, that's kind of sad. I don't feel hopeless, but you seem to, and
I feel hopeless unless we stop just happy talking and trying to get along, to go along to get along. We have 2 political parties that are dedicated to the same thing, the wealth of the billionaire class. The Democrats talk a different game, but they don't practice a different game.
that can be changed.
Right.
Help yourself, give it a try. Bernie gave it
I'm working at it. I'm only one life.
Yeah.
It'll be remembered, and
Yeah.
that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah. Well,
Midterms. We still have to have our voices out there.
But how do you, and again, and I work in a movement that talks about going back to simplicity and that. But what do you do when not most, but a lot of the world and a lot of the structures are based on big concrete, steel girded cities? The structure there is no ecology in those cities. There is nothing, and the lifestyles and to number one, it's try to legislate that difference is like, trying to climb a grease pole. It'll never happen.
if it'll never happen, then we are literally screwed.
No, not necessarily. It's what is the method of transition that God would have us do? Or what is this just, and I don't want to demean it because I believe in it, okay? But is this really just an initial unfolding of a vision on what the change needs to be? In other words, not calling us back to something that it's going to be really tough to pull the world back from. I mean, you're now talking about cities like Mexico City that are going to run out of water. Everybody's not going to be able to plant gardens. kinds of things. It's gotta be more drastic than that. Or is it taking these little chunks one at a time and seeing how you can make that transition? Because that's the thing, you know, you take a look at some things, but then when you get alone, you say, I can help this part of the population out of 7 billion, you know, and it becomes a hopeless endeavor.
Yeah, so it's,
Oh, go ahead.
it's working at multiple levels, right? So it's trying to point out that this is not species normal. If we're gonna be species normal, this is the way you develop species normality and all the capacities that we're missing that you could see nested people have. And to just try to change the academic world, you know, who's very stuck in supporting the mega machine we're in. But then it's also the bottom up stuff. So, you know, 20% of the population adopts some practice. It can be a virus that just becomes part of the whole thing. So it's the bubbling up part. It's also the, you know, laying out the theory and then, you know, helping people do what they can in their own life. Even if you live in the city, you can honor the tree that's on the, you know, next to your building, or the plant in your window, or your pet, your dog, whatever, they're alive, and pay attention and listen, right? And so we all, once we start to all listen to Earth again, through which God is working and speaking all the time, right? We can make a change. But yeah, it looks kind of hopeless right now, but you know, we have to move.
There was a book published last year with the title, "The World is About to Change." Have you seen that book?
No.
We did a book study here, I think, on that book. I remember talking about it. And the United Nations they have formulated principles when the kind of thing you see in the Accords, the Paris Accords.
What's the thesis of the book?
And we've got an off-year election coming up, an opportunity to protest. Wasn't Marjorie arrested in the DC area?
I don't think so, but I don't know.
She spent a night in jail.
I don't remember her saying anything about that, but maybe you know something I don't.
Makes a good story.
I may
If
be.
she's a real good person, she's probably been in jail for a night.
Yeah, she was in DC for a while, so I don't know, but I don't remember hearing that story, so I can't help you.
My memory is notably fallible.
This whole thing, I mean, this whole discussion going on now, I think of process emphasis on relationship, relationality, being, and I'm even China. I'm thinking of a Minnesota author, Bill Holm,
Yeah,
who
sure.
died several years ago now, unfortunately. Big guy, 6'8", 6'9". He was a wonderful person.
Good stories.
Huh?
Good storyteller.
Yes,
Very good.
excellent story. Anyway, he went to China for, I think, a couple of years. He lived there to teach English in some school. And he told us that he discovered just the humanity to relate to the people who were right there with him. And he said he went to this little church out in the countryside somewhere, I don't know where. And he said it turned out to be of a Lutheran background, for Pete's sake, in the middle of China. And he said he sat next to this real little Chinese man in the pew, and of course he is a big guy. And he said, I could follow everything in the service. He said, and then we got to the sermon, and this little man next to me, he said, he looked up to me and he smiled and he said something. And Bill said, I couldn't understand what he said, of course. He said, but I knew what he meant. He said, the sermon is too long. Just that kind of human touch
Yeah.
and relating to people. And I think, isn't that part of what processes goal is, this relationship?
The things, and I think again, this is the wisdom chapter that she talks about, maybe it's the power chapter. One of the things that took me a long time to understand about the process model. There's something very similar in Buddhism, which is my happiness contributes to the world's happiness, right? We have this tendency to think, and again, I think this is left brain Western thinking. We have this tendency to think, I have to have all this stuff and I have to fight to keep it away from other people so that I get it. Instead, this model suggests that what I become, with all the feelings around that, actually becomes a gift to the world. So that what I do, how I live, is out there, and it's out there in the world, and by that very fact, it's out there in God, right? And so God has to deal with it. God has to deal with my fear. God has to deal with my irritation. God has to deal with my joy. God has to deal with my experiences of loving, right? All of that is part of what makes God, makes the consequent nature of God. And that means that everything else also receives that. Everything else in the world also receives that.
And that's anger too.
And that's anger
Hate.
too, and hate.
I think of myself as a parent. All through all of these discussions, I've thought of how we relate to our children in those ways and how they relate back to us or feel back to us. And I'm irritated with them. I love them. I try to teach them. They don't always accept that teaching. I think
And
it's, and Fred, what you said, Fred is helping us here with our tiny home settlement. And I think that speaks a lot to how we affect other people in the world, because people say, well, you're only helping 2 people. Well, that's 2 people. And I went to the celebration down at Mosaic last Monday. It's not just 2 people. There are a lot of people affected, and not just the people in the homes. It's the people around them that are feeling good about what they're doing. And I think it does spread. And we can't look on the scale of 7 billion people because we can't affect 7 billion people. But if we affect a few others and they affect a few others, it grows.
Okay, wait, it's 11:30. We are gonna have to close because the bridge people.
The bridge.
come. Anyway, just wanted to say that, as I was reading this, one thing that struck me along the way was how much this description of God through these chapters, fits our, Micah 6:8, what does God require of you? Do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with your God. And then when I got to the last chapter and read it, and then was going back and going through it, it really struck me again too about that, because she says at the beginning of chapter 7 on page 74, okay, so divine presence answers the human need of holiness, and holiness itself may offer a key to knowing the ultimate presence that is God. And love, holiness gives way to love. Divine wisdom answers the problem of insecurity, eliciting trust. When the contingencies of time would evoke our fear. The God as presence and wisdom answers problems experienced by the individual. But then the power, that's the integration of us all and how we can move forward. The one becomes many. And that with power, she says, on about page 78, it's the power of God, or the power of hope that rests with the nature of God is the power of justice. So there's always this hope of justice. So I think of, justice and kindness and walking humbly with God there. But then I also thought, okay, at the end of 1 Corinthians 13, it's faith, love, hope. Faith, that's trust, and hope and love. She's addressing all of that in here. And how the love of God, yeah, that's what helps trigger the rest of it, trigger the faith and trigger the hope and all that. So that I thought was such a nice thought to be kind of a summary of what's going on here. So next time we're reading the next section on God's presence through Jesus. And so we're getting to the Christology. It's part 3, so it's all part 3. So again, it's about 40 some pages.
Chapter 8 to 10.
I have a question.
8, 9, and 10.
And that is, I have a very good friend living in the units in our condo, and he's a Muslim. And we talk a lot, and I'm beginning to think that his God is my God, and I just want to be sure that I'm not off my rocker.
His God is your God. We both worship one God.
Right.
We both agree there's one God. It's gotta be the same God.
If you read the Quran, you will find that all of the stories that are in the Bible are mentioned one place or another.
Yeah.
Good. I can sleep well.
The island of, I always say the wrong one. Zanzibar is about 70% Muslim, 30% Christian, and it's a non-event.
Yeah.
Our driver was a Muslim man. One of his best friends is a Christian, and he says there's no issue, but they don't talk theology.
Except I've heard them say, you love God and you love your neighbor as yourself. And I think that's almost most religion.
Yeah.
If
And
it
I
isn't
think that's
religion,
pretty
what?
important.
I just mentioned that we have projected a schedule that would take us in meetings once a month through May. We would not meet in June and follow. Is that right, Carol?
Yeah, if we ended up with a snowstorm or something, we might be able to do a Zoom session, but that's not very satisfactory. So June can be a backup month. We have to push things off. But, yeah,
And it's always the second Saturday a month.
always the second Saturday. Yeah, that makes it easy, yeah. And we'll see how the weather goes. We might end up over at Johanna Shores if it looks pretty busy. So
I just wanted to add, the Zoom works just fine. I sat here and watched I was at the session in person and then I watched the
Yeah.
Zoom.
Yeah.
It's fine. You
Yeah.
can pick it up.
And I was surprised, as I said in my email I sent out to everybody, I mean, sorry for the camera stuff. We had one little glitch at the very beginning here where it kind of wandered off. I think when Karen came around, it got confused, but other than that, it's held for us, so the camera's not distracted. And the closed captioning was actually pretty good. There were a few mistakes, some of them, a couple of little amusing ones, but it came through in the closed captioning, so even if you have a hard time with it, you can kind of figure it out from closed captioning. So I was very pleased with how we did. So hopefully this one got recorded as well. So you can go back and look at it. So you can and share it if you want.
I'm really grateful Darcia can be with us.
Yes.
Guys, back, come to Prince of Peace for a forum sometime,
Yeah.
if we can arrange the thing. we're talking about. Yeah. All right. We need to get the tables down, chairs can just get pushed aside. And I can
Don't
sit-
stack the chairs.
It's a little hard for me to hear.
I wondered about this.
We're not very, child care houses to find anymore. We are this week.
Done a little bit.
In Indiana.
MEA.